Um, Thank you all. First of all, I really want to thank a lot of people came here from Greece. I have a lot of people in the front row, and particularly George Panos that did an excellent presentation, so I'm a little bit scared that mine will be like boring and dull. Hopefully not. So I will try to talk about observability in this talk. It's about beyond logs, how we can achieve observability when it comes to UI test automation. And we'll start a little bit with some theory about observability, but first thing first. Γεια σας. Γεια σας. I hear a lot of γεια σας. So, I'm Giannis. I'm a head of QA at Snappy. I'm based in Athens. I really love working with everything that touches product and engineering. I'm a Grafana champion. I'm also a Lambda test ambassador. I think we should tell that in the presentation. I love hiking and fishing. I'm not this guy. I wish I was, but it's just another photo of, I generated. It's a GIF, actually. So anyone, if you want to find me, I have my email also in the end. In the last slide, we'll talk about this. So the agenda of the talk. We'll talk about the observability theory. We will deep dive into Prometheus-Grafana and how we can use the Grafana stack together with our Selenium stack. And we'll see some case studies when it comes to Selenium, how we can monitor Selenium Grid or even our automated test pipelines. We'll get some gathering and some learnings in the end, and anything you want to ask me, feel free, but not the guys from Greece. They already know about mostly everything. All right. So let's start with some theory. I don't like theory. We are engineers in this room, most of us. But we need to talk a little bit about that as well to cover the basics around observability, how we can use observability, what is observability, and why do we need observability when it comes to UI test automation. So, systems are observable by the data they produce, we say here. So in turns, we help determine if our infrastructure is actually healthy and it's functioning normally. It's actually a process that making our system internal state more transparent to our teams. There is a big difference between observability and monitoring. Anyone? What is monitoring and one difference that you may think we have? Not from Greece. I don't accept answers from here. So monitoring focuses on collecting data, right? Observability is focusing on understanding, interpreting all this data. What's the problem in our system? We need to gain a deeper understanding in order to get the outcome of a healthy system, how we can actually fix the system or a performance issue that may arise in our system. So observability, it's more, let's say, proactive, more holistic approach to manage more complex systems, right? Have you seen this term in another case? Anyone? Which one? This one? This is for observability. Anything like similar to this? You have seen that before? Accessibility, yeah. Kubernetes, KA test. So, this is O11 or OLY. It's a term that it's an abbreviation for observability that developers, they want to make sure they are very brief in the terms that they are using. That's why they have this term. So we can take why it's 11, because it's exactly 11 characters between O and Y. So you will see here, and that's why we refer to this term, which is a brief term. And as I said, accessibility is one another abbreviation. We have Kubernetes with 8 characters between K and S. So they want to be brief, and that's why we have this term. All right. So let's go a little bit deeper in the theory. You had coffee, right, everybody? All right. So this is a body. Think now our bodies, they are consisting of multiple layers, multiple systems inside. So there are different functions as well of each of these components that we have in the body. For example, we have the digestive system. So It helps digest food, or circularity system pumps the blood throughout our whole body, let's say. All these systems are actually come together. Is the digestive. All these systems come together and we have actually the whole body, right? So it's a complex mechanism. And why I'm talking about this, we'll talk a little bit later on that. When something happens to our body, we need to go to a doctor, right? First, they need to take our vitals. So they take our blood pressure, the oxygen level, our temperature. So you see all these metrics. Now, there is a normal range when these metrics should fall. And if we observe something outside of these metrics, we need to make sure we notify what is wrong, in which component of our system, of our body, something is wrong, right? So after taking all the vitals into account, the doctor will make some questions to us, to the patients. They need to know more context about the problem. They need to find out where exactly is the problem. So they need to trace it. So you get my point on this. So the doctor may run some tests, and based on this information, let's say the doctor suspects something, that we have a mild bleeding somewhere in our digestive. They need to do more tests. So to figure out the source, we need to do some, we need to tag, for example, the red blood cells with tracers and visualize how these are actually travel throughout our body. So the doctor can understand from that, from the tracers, where exactly the problem is. So the doctor is alerted at some point and can understand, pick up a group of doctors and try to figure a solution for a healthy problem that the patient can have. So why I'm talking about this? Because we can apply all this process for observability in software systems, right? So it's the same principles, the same basics. When we are talking about software systems, we can talk about an application which is really complex. We need to understand, what the problem is when we have a performance issue in the software system, and we need to get some context around it, right? And then we can come up with a plan, like the doctor, and try to resolve the issue or prevent the issue from happening in the future. So let's go back. So you see here, we have the complex body. Here it's a typical example of a software system running, with the middleware. We have UI can be split on different components. We have the backend services. Some companies actually develop like hundreds of microservices running in the backend. Even hundreds of, not hundreds, but a couple of databases you see here in the right. So you understand the information that flows from the UI layer to the backend, it's actually chaotic. So we need to have a way to trace if something goes wrong. Now, the first thing of observability, of the first pillar of observability, is the metrics. The metrics is what we said earlier, the vitals for our body. We need to take the vital signs, we need to collect metrics, and here you can see like a Grafana dashboard very nicely that visualizes all these metrics to the user. So the metrics are numerical data, like the blood pressure or the temperature. They provide clues about our health of our system and the performance of the software system. We need to take these vitals and make sure they are inside the range that we discussed earlier. So it's an approach that it's very similar and clear for the observability metrics that we're going to see today. We need to collect numerical data. Now the logs is the thing that is telling us what is happening, right? We know that something is wrong, and like the doctor talks to the patient, we have the logs. It's not very clear, but here it's a Grafana dashboard that shows the logs of our system. And we can refer to the logs to get more context about our system and get more information. And the last part is the traces. So we need to understand to trace where the problem is. So that's like the doctor examines our body and makes sure we have tracer in our bloods. Here are the traces. We have another component in Grafana which is called Grafana Tempo. It's very nice. You can pick up and find the root cause of your problem. Now, observability stack, I'm pretty sure you have seen a lot of this, right? Anyone used Dynatrace? Raise hand. Oh, you used Dynatrace? Really? That's cool. Grafana, anyone? Nice. Datadog, there are a lot. I mean, it depends on how your engineering teams are using them, but most of them are really a lot of tools in them, in the community that you can take benefit of. Of course, we're going to talk about Prometheus and Grafana in this talk. So Prometheus one-to-one. So we see here, this is the architecture of Prometheus. Who used Prometheus, PromQL? A lot of people. Nice. So Prometheus is using the central part is the Prometheus server, which is the hub, actually. It's the brain of the operations, let's say. We have AlertManager, which is the component that pushes alerts and notify teams. It's like PagerDuty. You can use email hooks like Slack, Teams, whatever you are using as a messaging for you. We have the data visualization, of course. This is the part of Grafana querying our metrics and the data from Prometheus server through PromQL. And sometimes we use also push gateway. Who knows push gateway? You like it? You can live without it, right? So push gateway, it's for short-term jobs, right? It's not always good to use it, but if you have something that is running very fast and you want to query data or metrics out of it, and this is why in Selenium world we use push gateway. In this talk, we'll use a lot push gateway. Now, so what we do is we create our target application, whatever that is. We want to make sure we use push gateway to get the metrics or push metrics to the push gateway, then Prometheus to collect this from push gateway, and then we have Grafana and the nice visualization. This is just the flow that I'm describing today. And this is just an example, of the configuration file of Prometheus. You need to make sure if you are running through Docker Compose, always refer to the host Docker internal. I'm just, a painful point for me because if you use Docker, you need to understand that everything lives within the container. So you need to be very careful how do you set up all the target application to the stack. Now, why I'm talking about observability, I spent too much time with the main topic is Selenium, right? So Selenium Grid, this is our case study. What we want to do, it's a complex system, right? We have, in the new architecture, we have a lot of components. We have the queue, distributor, router, session map, event bus. There are, a bunch of them. And a lot of companies that don't use a third-party vendor, for the device farm. So they want to make sure they notify or they can use a way to trace things through the observability stack and how we are going to do it. So the case study is pretty similar as before. We have Selenium Grid, which is our application right now. What we want to do is we want to push metrics out to push gateway, and then Prometheus scraps the data from push gateway and we collect through Grafana. And nicely we can see how the Selenium Grid is performing all the time through Grafana. This is the main concept of what we are trying to see. Now, a little bit more details. What we can use. Of course, we are using the API of Selenium Grid behind to get these metrics. So one of these metrics can be the hub session count. It can be the max session, how many sessions are actually active in our hub. You see most of them are around hub, but you can configure your own exporter. I didn't talk about exporter much, but this is a basic concept to use when you are developing a Prometheus client. So what we want to do is to create an exporter that exports all these metrics to Prometheus through calling API calls to Selenium Grid, which is up and running. And we have the session queue size, or even maybe we can make sure if our grid is up and running. If it's down, we just notify our teams, the grid is down, you need to take some actions, prevent this from happening again in the future. Now, the Selenium exporter and most of the exporters in Prometheus, they are based in Go. It's Go libraries. It's the client libraries that you built in Go. Anyone developed in Go here in the room? Oh, nice. So, it's lightweight libraries. What they're supposed to do is just they query, as I said, the API, and then they can expose these metrics to our Prometheus instance. For that reason, I give an example here in our Docker Compose. We built an image of this exporter, which is the client library, and we can send a command with the URL of the Selenium Grid to make sure it can collect the data and the metrics from this Selenium Grid instance through specific ports. This is just an example, but what we have done internally, we wanted to build something custom that can query our Selenium Grid API, as you may know, through GraphQL. And through this, we take all the responses of the API and we send this as metrics to Prometheus. Now, here it's another example, some functions of the exporter. I'm just, saying some here, like the new exporter or the describe. You will see here we just provide which metrics we want to collect from Selenium Grid, like total slots, how many sessions we have, or the count, or even the nodes that you have in your Selenium Grid, and you need to query them and just provide them as metrics, as we said earlier. So this is mainly the main functions of our exporter. Of course, you need to define the metrics, and these have been done here in the exported section. These are gates metrics, by the way. Do you know gates? What is the difference from counter? Anyone? Do you know gates, counters? They are typical metrics from Prometheus, by the way. It's like counter. Like we want a metric that we can easily increase or decrease, and this is the gates. And here we define some description around the metric. Here we define if the name is up, if our system is up and running. And you always need to define also the help. These are some attributes around the Prometheus metric. Then we have the collect. This is the function that we actually collect the metrics. It's called by Prometheus, at regular intervals, and it actually provides the current data querying the GraphQL of the Selenium Grid. And what we do in the main function, let's say, of the Go exporter is just to register everything and have everything up and running. Right, so in a sense, the exporter, as we said, is our target application. We use Prometheus to collect through the exporter the metrics. We then use the alert manager very easily to go through the teams and alert when our Selenium Grid have any outages or you have any problems. Those is the main, let's say, concept of observability when it comes to Selenium Grid. And again, I'm repeating myself just to shake things up and make it very understandable. This is our grid. We have hub. We can have nodes. We can have a device farm. You can have your mobile devices, your desktop instances. Everything is here. And then you just start querying GraphQL API of Selenium Grid to push gateway, Prometheus, and alert manager. And in the end, your team is aware when something is wrong with your infrastructure. Here it's another example of the alert manager. It's cool because with the YAML configuration of alert manager, you see here an expression like I can go and get an instance on my alert manager. I can use parameters, parameterize the description of the message that I want to provide to our engineering teams. For example, here the expression that alert manager is trying to match is that the app metric, it's equals to 0, which is a numerical value, or 0 or 1. And when it's 0, we make sure that the Selenium Grid is down, and then we need to trigger an alert to our teams. And this is the example of how to configure it for Slack. You will see the message from Alert Manager saying, Selenium Grid is down. You can define your channel here on the Slack configs, and here the API URL, which is the webhook URL for configuring the integration between your Slack and your Alert Manager. Cool. So we have Alert Manager, we have everything in place, so let's see some dashboards now, which is really cool. We need to make sure we get some information visualized. So here in Grafana, what we use PromQL. It's not very clear, but in the dashboards, we can go and use the data source. The data source is the Prometheus instance that we have installed. And from here, after we have push gateway collecting metrics and pushing to Prometheus, you can just use PromQL directly, or Grafana has a nice way. You don't even need to know PromQL to query your data. It's a nice way because they have all the needed configurations in the widgets how to query your Prometheus instance. And you will see a nice widget as well here. We're querying the app metric from Selenium Grid to see, to the team that the Selenium Grid is up and running. It will be red or down. You can configure whatever the visualization can be. It's really cool, though, because the team is aware all the time of if something is wrong with your grid infrastructure. Now, the last part of this talk, one case study is the Selenium Grid, which is a complex system, right? And we need to observe how grid is going on, if you have develop your own solution internally. Now, the last thing is end-to-end tests. Right? End-to-end tests are really slow. That's why we have all these talks about empowering the teams, have more parallel sessions, parallelism in devices. Of course, as you said, the testing pyramid that everybody is talking all these years, the end-to-end tests should be very limited set of tests when we are testing our application. Why? Because these tests are really complex. Not only on tracing issues, if something is wrong, but they are taking also a lot of execution time, a lot of resources, especially for mobile, right? You start mobile, you need to install an APK, you are waiting a few minutes, and this needs to be cast for every device. So you understand it's really complex, really time-consuming. How observability and monitoring can help us a little bit to speed up the process. As I said, here it's say an example of just a modern web application. You have your web app. We don't see the microservices, but you see in the user journey a lot of things coming to the back and forth front end. We have core systems. We have a lot of databases. Anything can go wrong, we said, right? And in this typical journey, everything is slow to respond back to the engineers or the QA people. So we need to make sure we have this feedback very quickly at the time we get something, we get a failure from this. Now from that, in this typical case study that we have developed, by the way, we have done a workshop around this topic, which I'm particularly very proud in another conference, but we use Selenium, we can use Java, it doesn't matter, we can use whatever programming language you want. We have JUnit or TestNG, we want to just like in Selenium Grid, we use push gateway to push metrics from the tests, and then we have Prometheus scrapping this data, Grafana, and you know the story. I think we said that earlier, right? This is the main concept of the Grafana stack, but we use push gateway because they are short-lived jobs. This test execution suite can take like an hour or 2 hours. After that, it's killed, so that's why we use push gateway. We don't push things without push gateway to Prometheus directly. Now, another component, we talked about metrics, but I didn't talk about the Loki, which is a horizontally scalable solution from Grafana. I use it a lot, especially when you have Prometheus, Grafana, everything in place. It's nice to have your logs as well, right? We didn't talk about traces, but we focus more on the metrics and the logs. So Grafana log it's inspired by Prometheus, by the way, but it differs from Prometheus. Prometheus is for metrics, Loki is for logs, and Tempo is for traces, right? So what we use in our solution, Selenium runs our tests in the agent, and the agent just create a connection to our Grafana instance, Grafana Loki instance, to push logs as well. And then from our dashboard, we can use logql, like PromQL, to just query our logs very nicely in Grafana. So with one solution, you have Grafana to rule them all. Even Tempo, have Loki, and you have also the solution for Prometheus. Now here you will see an example. I'm using some labels. It's nice to put labels as well in your logs all the time, and you can query your logs anytime. You can see your Selenium test logs. It's really easy, and visualize them through Grafana very nicely. I think I don't have much time. So in the final approach, we have the tests running through TestNG, for example. You know TestNG, it's an old, I'm an old guy, I'm 15 years, so TestNG is like way back. Then just the unit framework. We have our test scripts running in different browsers in our grids. We use push gateway to collect the data from our tests runtime. And what we do, we define listeners. So listeners are actually capturing all these metrics runtime. We define here the client for push gateway, where it runs, and then we make a connection to the gateway through the listener to just start pushing metrics at the time of the execution. So some useful information like labels, we can set up the job names, maybe the project you are running your tests, or maybe the metrics names. Here for us it's how many tests are passing, how many they are failing, how many they are skipped. So it's just an example. Runtime, we can get test execution very fast in our Grafana instance. And we use gates as well as a metric, as we did with the Selenium Grid exporter. We use the labels. Each time, what we want to use is to increase the number of tests we are passing. We want to monitor how the tests are doing, right? Runtime. And this is the example of pushing this data. In the listeners, we have some functions to capture events from the tests. When you have a failure or a success case, you just make the connection, you just magically push everything to push gateway. And testing dashboards at last. In Grafana, you create some pie charts or another cool visualizations. Why I'm telling you this, it's just a nice story because if you have a long execution suite, just go there and query them, runtime, you can have your AlertManager. Whenever you get a failure, you don't need to wait a CI execution to just finish. You can do this runtime and get the right team, diagnose the problems at the time that the failure is actually occurring. Now, before closing, what we learned, observability must see left, right? This is the shift left mentality. Observability is part of the engineering culture. And nowadays, engineering teams, they all know about observability, how to use observability. And we saw some cool case studies when it comes to Selenium Grid, how to observe our internal infrastructure. Not everybody or any company is using a cloud infra. Maybe you have your own solution developed internally, so you need to observe how the solution is performing and get alerts on time, alert your teams to make sure you are dealing with problems on your infrastructure. Observe the end-to-end test suites in a historical manner. Get data, have Grafana in one place. Getting all these metrics to Grafana is super powerful. We saw about Loki as well, if you want the logs of your tests in the same place as well. We didn't cover the traces, but you can also use traces, especially Selenium Grid now supports OpenTelemetry. You can actually create a simple case study around the traces as well. In the end, you need to cultivate observability in your QA teams. This is, as more complexity comes to the web applications nowadays, more complex applications are coming. More complex our testing solutions may be, and you need to cultivate this observability as much as possible within your teams. I think that will be all. If you need to get in touch with me, you can scan the barcode. Thank you very much. You have questions? Oh, thank God. Right.
Guys,
we don't have questions. Thank you. No, I'm kidding.
Do you have any question?
No, I'm not seeing anything, so
Someone wants to ask? Someone wants to ask? Okay.
So in fact, it's not a question, but just to say that we have something similar. But in our case, instead of, as we are running our tests on Jenkins, what we made is a Jenkins exporter that, in fact, Jenkins exporter, what we do is also generate these metrics from the test and collect them, so we don't need to use the push gateway for that particular case, because the content is going to be available on the Jenkins.
All right. So in your case, you said that you are using an exporter for Jenkins.
Yeah, and this Jenkins exporter, you want to look for it in Uname project / Jenkins exporter.
That's in the GitHub account.
It's open source, so you
can.
Oh,
nice, nice, very good, very cool. It's nice to see that you have a similar case study.
Anyone more?
Thank God it wasn't the question.
Anyone?
Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you have your tests containerized and you would have, for example, a sidecar, could you then scrape immediately without using the push gateway?
As the fellow person said, we need to build the exporter if you don't want to use the push gateway. So the exporter can live and run through the containers directly to Prometheus. So if you have exporter, you don't need push gateway.
We don't have an exporter, but I mean, we have Prometheus scraping all of our application logs from the different containers. So I was thinking if the tests are containerized as well, whether that would work, but I don't know. That was just
maybe, but I think the key difference here, I don't know why you don't use, but Prometheus, the whole idea is how to scrap data from your application. So you either create an exporter, which is a Docker image, it's a Docker container. So maybe your tests can be an exporter themselves, like create a Docker container that works as an exporter. And then the Prometheus, gets, it's scraping the data from this Docker image directly. But push gateway in general, the pattern says you need to avoid it as much as possible because you cannot delete the data from push gateway, so the metrics lives there forever. Of course, like the tests, if you don't have a Docker container, as you said, you have test execution, which lives like a couple of hours. It's really reasonable to use this solution of push gateway. I mean, if you don't have this approach of exporter implemented, but it's a nice one.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, any more?
I didn't say anything. Oh my God. This is the question, right? The reference.
No.
Oh my God.
First, ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Παρακαλώ.
And why, or have you tried out Mimir? Because you have all the stack, and you're saying all the time about Prometheus.
Yeah.
And we have a problem because we need Thanos to be just for the persistence of the data. And have you tried out Mimir?
No, but it's a good case to start it out. So you use the same stack?
But as we need the metrics for in long term, we have to. We needed Thanos, and then we changed to Mimir.
All right.
Because Thanos was not scaling so good.
But you are using it for test infrastructure?
Yeah, for everything.
Well. For everything.
We have the same structure for production and for testing, so we're just doing everything there.
Okay. I need to contact you.
That's a problem, actually.
I will contact you after the conference. No, why?
Okay.
No, please, σας παρακαλώ.
Okay, any more?
Hi, thanks a lot for the presentation. How do you think about traces in end-to-end tests? Because we talk about metrics and logs, and it makes sense for end-to-end tests. But on traces, it's kind of hard for me to think about it because usually it will be useful to have traces in your application and then kind of correlate that with a trace from an end-to-end test. But I'm not sure how
Yeah,
how
it's
to
a nice
implement it?
question. How do I envision? I mean, one particular case study is the open telemetry of Selenium Grid. So you have tracing directly in Selenium Grid. But we're not talking about Selenium Grid in the traces. So Selenium Grid is instrumented. You know that already. So if you want to find what's happening on your grid, you can use the tracing there. But in the case of running end-to-end tests, what I was thinking is like try to collect the trace ID from your test that has to do with the application itself. I mean, it's not about the tests themselves, right? And then you just need to connect your test instance with a specific trace ID on your application, just to help debugging purposes, analyzing, your test execution and everything. So this is the only, I think, idea that you can enable tracing over there.
So it's kind of a precondition that you have tracing in your application
Yeah.
to then implement it in your...
If you are supporting open telemetry in your application, yes. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks.
Nice to have questions. I really love it. No, I'm kidding. Because one fellow in the beginning said to me, I'm going to give you a very, very difficult question. Oh my God. Shit.
So, any more questions? Many thanks.
The guy over here.
Please.
Okay, I will do the question.
Shit.
No,
Unavoidable.
okay, it's not a question. It's mostly like a step forward. I don't know if you have already done it, but maybe it would be very interesting when you create the dashboards where you could combine metrics from test and the application itself. So we have the tests that fail, and this could have, let's say, 3 or 4 microservices. So you can see which one actually failed or what were the logs during the time that the application failed. So I don't know if at some time you have considered to create dashboards that have both test and application metrics.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, and Grafana has
It was not a question, actually, right?
It was a suggestion. Sorry. I was looking forward to that suggestion. So yeah, I think Grafana have a lot of, I'm not promoting Grafana, I mean any observability stack, right? But we use Grafana for this reason in this particular case study. But it has a way to have, I mean, this solution that Kostas is referring to is a good friend of mine. So he's referring to a solution you can have logs, traces together from the tests. Yeah, I think for debugging and visualizing close with the application, it's a cool solution. Maybe we can develop something together. And it's super powerful because you don't have to want disconnected Selenium tests or whatever test you have in your pipeline. You need to connect them somehow with your traces in your application. And I think it's, Grafana as a visualization tool has every information. I mean, it's very flexible. And nowadays, it's more easy actually to build a dashboard. Back like 2-3 years ago, it was really difficult. But now it's super useful and super easy. So yeah, I think it's cool as a suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, guys. Many thanks.
Thank you.